Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bacta podcast. I am here, as always, with, he's not really a Sith Lord, more like a Star Wars GIF Lord. It's Rob Fonda.
Okay, I like that. The GIF Lord.
Yeah, you always throw him in the chat. It's pretty cool.
You know, it's how I've cultivated my references that just pop into my brain. Like, usually I'd be throwing them out there if we were person to person, but, you know, in a group chat, I go right to the GIFs.
The internet provides.
It does.
And on our left, well, Cam's force ghosted us today.
Mm-hmm.
So if
relegated to the world between worlds.
Yeah. So unfortunately, it's just the daring duo of Chewie and Han today. So
you know what?
We're here for it, though.
We are here to do it. We had a lot of gruesome twosomes in this episode this week.
We sure did. So it's only fitting, actually. A lot of pairs going on. So,
indeed.
But just overall thoughts first, Rob, and just off the rip. How was this week's episode? Because I know it's been a little polarizing, so I've heard.
That's surprising for me to hear, because I will say, like, I will say when I first watched this episode and I came out of it, I felt a little overwhelmed by everything they had thrown at me, and because it was so much to process, so much to take in. But as I went through and watched it again, I'll say this about that too. When I watch a lot of these episodes or rewatch them to make my notes for the episode or write my breakdown, I'll skip through a lot. Like, okay, yeah, I remember what happened, and I'll type it out. This episode in particular, especially the first half, I just rewatched it.
Yeah.
I had a really hard time skipping through it because I just was so enamored with what they did and how they did it and diving deeper into the themes. And I kind of went off on my own paths of just like, oh, I bet this is a reference to this episode of Clone Wars. Let me go watch that whole episode and see how that informs like what is being said here. And I felt like I walked away from it being like, this was not only a commentary, I feel like, on just AHSOKA and where she's at as a character, but also a lot of the overarching themes of Star Wars as a whole. And of course, Anakin and the Skywalker saga, and a lot of what, Lucas had to say in general when he was even starting this whole project. And all that to say, I really enjoyed this episode.
Yeah.
I can certainly, see where some people, especially people that haven't, made their journey through all four seasons of Rebels, may have been a little lost, especially if you haven't even watched Clone Wars. Again, the season as a whole has probably been a little confusing for you. But as I mentioned before, we even started recording. If you have questions or thoughts about like, hey, this doesn't make sense, or where does this come from? The answer is usually more Star Wars.
More Star Wars.
There's an episode that you missed. There's a season you missed.
Yeah.
I will say, especially for this, in particular, this season of AHSOKA, it's building so much on the animated shows, and I think has rewarded the people that have made that journey. And again, when we started this podcast, I said that I was really hesitant to dive into the animated material, especially considering where it started off with the animated Clone Wars movie. I was not a fan. I'm still not a fan.
Yeah.
But boy, that journey through the Clone Wars TV show was so special. And by the time you get to the end of it, I believe after 7 seasons, it's just so good. And I can't imagine the story of Star Wars without AHSOKA at this point.
Yeah.
Which is not at all what I would have said after walking out of that movie theater. I was I do not get what they are trying to do here. But I really enjoyed it. And what are your thoughts, Keith?
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree on a lot of that. I think I fall somewhere in between, where it's like I have taken the Clone Wars journey, but I haven't finished out with all the Rebels. And just obviously being a diehard Star Wars fan and being good friends with you, I feel like I have a leg up on most. on most. And I would totally agree. If you are lost or feeling as though this is a little bit over your head, or you didn't quite connect with the episode, I think the answer is this podcast, first of all, and more Star Wars.
Yeah, so. I mean, that's what I tell everybody who's starting this, and they're just like, I didn't watch Rebels, or I don't know who AHSOKA is. I'm just like, feel free. Reach out to me. I would be more than happy to sit down and talk your ear off about all of this and tell you why I love it and why everything makes sense.
Yeah.
Don't tell me it doesn't make sense. It makes sense. No, I'm kidding. Everybody is allowed to their opinion, even if they're wrong.
That right there was the flash of the dark side that you don't normally see with Rob, but it will come out, and there's a reason Vader's his favorite character. That's all
it
I'm
is.
All right, well, let's jump in here, Anakin, to Shadow Warrior.
Indeed. So episode 5, Shadow Warrior. We open on Hera Jason and Chopper stepping out of the Ghost near the altar on Cetos, realizing that just about everybody that they went there to find is long gone. Who they do find nearby is Hu Yang, holding Sabine's discarded helmet, lamenting that AHSOKA and Sabine didn't follow his advice to stick together, that nobody ever listens to the droids.
No one listens to the droids. I'd shout out to David Tennant for just some great voice acting in a role that requires you to be robotic. And he's just got the emotion both from the body language, but just I just love his character. I think he's just doing such a great job with it. And it was a tough L for your boy.
It is. And you know, again, you're right. He's done such a great job with this role from a character I never thought we'd see again after 2-3 episodes of Clone Wars. I was like, okay, well, he'll never come back. And here he is. You know, I think absolutely killing it. But from here, we're taken to the world between worlds where AHSOKA is face to face with her old master, Anakin Skywalker. He tells
Goosebumps.
Oh, right. So he tells her that though she lost her fight with Baylan, she still has a chance to live, and that he's there to finish her training. AHSOKA comments it's a little late for that, but Anakin tells Snips that it's never too late to learn, which does bring me to my first question. Where do you fall on the Snips/Sky Guy nicknames? Cute, forced, annoying, endearing? What do you think, Keith?
That's a good question. I'm going to go with it's just like dessert, man. You can't have too much of it, otherwise you're just gonna get a little sick and feel a little weird. It's not my favorite thing, but it's not the worst. I appreciate it, and it's a nod. And I think if they had said it one more time, I would have kind of been out. But you know, here we are.
I totally agree. And well, I agree to a point. Personally, I could never hear Snips or Sky Guy again and be totally happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, you don't need dessert. It's not a thing you need.
For whatever reason, I feel like that is kind of part of, like I mentioned, I'm not a huge fan of that original Clone Wars movie that they made. Where,
you don't say.
No, where those nicknames sort of originated. I feel like I know why they did it, to kind of give those characters that relationship and show that they're maybe a little bit different than your traditional Jedi Master and Padawan.
The only people that have nicknames in Star Wars are droids.
Yeah,
and it's like there's no Obi,
it's just I don't know. Yeah, I never quite got onto the Snip Sky Guy thing. I thought it was always a little forced and a little cringe, but like I see why they did it here. It definitely, they tried to get in on the feels of, hey, it's not only is Anakin back, but it's Hayden Christensen getting into that role and developing that relationship, which is obviously the first time we've seen that with him specifically.
Yeah.
But getting back into it, the lesson it turns out that he's there to teach is whether or not AHSOKA will fight to live. And as Anakin lights his lightsaber, Anakin tells him she won't fight him. He comments that, that's a line he's heard before, and launches into an attack that forces her to draw her own blades to defend herself. And obviously that is a reference to his interactions with Luke in Return of the Jedi, as he refused to fight Vader. And that was part of what ultimately saved Anakin, but that is not the situation.
Nah, this ain't it right now. But yeah.
Here, but we got a little bit of it in Obi-Wan too. But how great is it to see Hayden Christensen wielding a lightsaber again?
God, the dude knows how to do it, man.
Nobody does it better.
It's just great to see him do his thing. I mean, like, he was so good with all the lightsaber fights. I thought was probably the strongest part for him in the original or the prequels.
Wholeheartedly agree.
And it's like riding a bike for him. He looked so good doing it. The choreography was great. And he has this way of still acting on his face while he's swinging the lightsaber around that I think a lot of actors who I've seen in other lightsaber fights don't. I don't know what it is. And he's just intense eye contact. But even like all that amazing behind the scenes footage of the fights that we never saw that are online. Yeah. And so it's just great. And it's great to see him in a great, well-crafted moment. I mean, it's this whole episode, honestly, but to see him get a chance to really do his thing, that's just awesome.
Yeah, I think more than anybody we've seen in this series, just as a whole, really took to the lightsaber choreography, even to the point of like he invented that Anakin twirl that he does like behind his back and in front of him that I certainly can't do. And I've seen videos of Ewan McGregor talking about, he's like, I struggle to do that, and he invented that thing himself. And to see him get to do that again, I mean, the guy I think has a lot of fun doing it.
It's iconic. It's really at this point.
And I wonder, I know you've watched a little bit of Rebels. Were you surprised at how the conversation kind of started off and went with Anakin and AHSOKA, considering some of their last interactions and where Anakin kind of winds up in his journey, and the fact that, like, obviously we know where Anakin winds up after all is said and done with Return of the Jedi. And I'm sure maybe there's been some off-camera stuff with Ahsoka and Luke maybe talking about both of their relationships to Anakin. Were you so surprised that she was just so, oh, hey, like...
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like the way they did it, to be honest, because one of the things, and we talked actually about this off camera, there's this moment in Rebels when Ahsoka realizes, like, Vader is Anakin, but it's very unclear as to how much she realizes, and then she lies to the crew about it for some reason. It's just very kind of unclear. And so for them to kind of choose in this moment to kind of make the audience be where Ahsoka is, I think is a very smart way to play it, where, you can kind of put yourself in her shoes a lot easier. Surprising, yes. I think also Ahsoka kind of is in a bit of a weird state right now. She's not sure if she's dead. Is she dreaming? Like, what's going on? And so she sees Anakin, which was kind of in the form of kind of when she lost him, for lack of a better word. And so I think that kind of triggers this response, which seems kind of appropriate in this situation. What about you? Did you?
Yeah, no, I agree. There was a part of me that wanted her to start this whole thing with just like, how dare you?
Yeah.
Where have you been? Like, what have you done? Sort of stuff.
Your mother's been worried sick.
Right. But I also understand, there's a lot of stuff here that you could have between these characters that's not necessarily to the benefit of the story that they're trying to tell here.
Right.
So while I could watch 2 to 3 hours of these characters just hashing it out and catching up and trying to figure out exactly what happened to them over the course of time that they were apart. I understand, they have a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
People only have a certain amount of attention.
Yep.
Most of it is shorter than mine, and I understand that. And they got to get to what they got to get to. That being said, I did come across a clip this week, kind of touching on Filoni talking about that exact moment with Ahsoka in Rebels, and talking about that idea of she's at the moment of Order 66, when she's kind of reaching out through the Force, she's always even when she left the Jedi Order, she's always been able to reach out and feel Anakin there and have that security of knowing that her friend's there. And during Order 66, it's gone. She loses it.
That's right.
And she assumes, probably like most people do, that he's dead.
Yeah.
And then she has a moment where she reaches out with the Force in Rebels, and there's something there in Vader that feels familiar.
Yeah.
And while in the back of her mind, I think she knows what this means, there's a big part of her that can't come to grips with that.
Yeah.
And the idea of, well, that can't possibly be true.
Right.
He would never do that.
Right.
But then that realization of when she realizes that it very much is true is just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit more, I think, as soon as we get into where this vision goes. I think there being a lot of guilt that she feels of having left him. Not even just like, obviously she left the Jedi Order, and that was for reasons that were her own. But the fact that Anakin was left on his own and went down the path that he did, I think there's a lot of guilt that she harbors and trauma that she harbors, feeling that, like, if I had been there, maybe things wouldn't have gone that way.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that plays out in this vision.
Well, she said, we'll get into it, but she says, I'm a legacy of death and destruction.
Yeah.
And so, that's
absolutely
right into that hand.
Yeah. So in the material realm, Hera and crew scan for any sign of Sabine and Ahsoka.
So much scanning in this
a
episode.
lot of scanning.
Come on, guys.
Life forms, scanning, data points, coordinates. But Hu Yang finds the remnants of a star map, but it's just beyond repair. On top of all that bad news, Carson Teva comes around and says that Senator Organa, hey, Senator Organa,
we know who that is.
She can no longer cover for them, and the New Republic is sending ships to come and scoop up these errant soldiers and get the answers about whatever wild goose chase they're on. Things are looking grim until Jason points out to Hera that lightsabers can be heard clashing on the surface of the water, which inspires Hera to renew their search and start looking for survivors in the waves.
Time out.
Go ahead.
How the heck is Hera hearing the lightsabers? Because to me, I'm sitting there going, There's a Jedi thing going on, and then it's like Jason's like, hold on, Mom, listen to this, and it's like
I was a little confused by that as well. I wasn't quite sure, to be honest, because while I got where Jason was coming from, obviously, as Hu Yang mentions to Carson, who is immediately like, oh, what the hell was all that about?
Yeah.
He's like, oh, well, and especially to the audience that hasn't watched Rebels, like, well, his dad is,
Hey, Daddy, what a Jedi.
Kanan Jarrus, which, if I'm being nitpicky, I think Hu Yang would know him by his birth name, Caleb Doom, but that's just that's just me getting into the weeds.
We love when Rob gets into the weeds.
But yeah, I was a little confused as to why Hera could hear it. I didn't know if this was another point of them kind of democratizing the Force, or them kind of being like anybody can open themselves up to that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, they just didn't want to go off. I don't know. I truly don't know why. And I think this is one of my few complaints with this episode is that. And this is something, unfortunately, that I'm noticing in Filoni's episodes that he's directing, is there's these big, long pauses.
Sure.
Of just, like, long things that don't take... like, the audience knows what's up. One of the characters knows what's up, but then we watch the other character learn about the thing that we just all saw... and they just take these big, long 360 shots to think about it and chew on it. And it's like, that's great. And honestly, it plays in the movie format really well. Mm-hmm. I don't think it fits with the pace of the show. This was one of those moments for me where I was like, all right, as long as it's over quick enough for me not to think about it too much. Like,
sure. Kara, did you say you had an idea why that might have been?
I really feel like Anakin is stuck on a limbo kind of place.
Okay.
And so, remind me of Caleb's kid's name.
Oh, Jason.
He could hear them fighting because they actually were fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Ahsoka has to help Anakin become a Force ghost. Because he went from light to dark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then saving Luke, he kind of saved himself a little bit from the dark side, and now he has to come back to the light side. Okay. And she's going to help him be a full Force ghost. That's why he didn't look like a Force ghost.
He didn't.
He was kind of just on in a limbo.
Yeah. By the way, our amazing behind the camera, Kara.
Yes,
right?
Kara, our audio tech this time.
Sorry, I got excited.
No, it's like she's literally jumping behind the camera, and we're like, we must be saying something right.
We're circling it, and I think there's something to be said for that. And I certainly have my theories later on about where Anakin is in his whole journey. But yeah, because there's a lot of people that are just like, did Anakin truly redeem himself in that one action at the very end of his life? Like a, Catholic Hail Mary on their deathbed, like get fully saved. There's a lot of child murder to say one thing that Vader was responsible for, or Anakin, even before, like the women and the children.
Yeah.
He had a lot to atone for. But speaking of Anakin, he is dealt another blow to the head as Ahsoka delivers a fancy spin kick in their duel. She's smug and saying like, well, I guess you don't have all that much to teach me. But Anakin has a little bit more up his sleeve as he slashes the bridge beneath her and sends her tumbling back in time.
I love this moment.
To a long ago battle in the Clone Wars. And pretty awesome that we're getting to see some Gen 1 clone troopers, short hair, Jedi Anakin and young Ahsoka all in live action for the first time. Keith, what are your thoughts on it?
So many great things here. One, it's Anakin using the environment again.
Yes.
It's best the Padawan. That's just like
common theme.
Just chef's kiss. Okay.
Yes.
Second thing, we were all on the show here talking about how would it be cool if they did a Clone Wars flashback, and I was super excited about that, and we got it. So like, and to put it in this kind of dream world, dream state, really cool, and then to use Anakin's look as a passage of time, I thought was a really brilliant way to do it, to both kind of keep it in this weird memory world, but also kind of ground it in something specific. I thought that was really great. And I thought young Ahsoka did a pretty good job.
Not bad. Played by Ariana Greenblatt, who was recently Sasha, the daughter in the Barbie movie, but also young Gamora in Infinity War.
I knew she looked familiar in green.
Making a career out of playing young alien women.
And crushing it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, I immediately thought, as did Rob, that this this is definitely like a great use of the volume, which is how they shoot on all these Star Wars shows with a green screen that's actually images projected and using Unreal Engine. It's a whole thing. But our friend who worked on the show actually told us that this was not shot on the volume, that this was shot basically on location, but they're backlot, and I
really
thought that
surprising.
I thought that was super cool. I mean, that's probably why it looks so great. Honestly,
it looked great. Just having that sort of hazy in between, like things are there but not there. There's the shadows of the larger, ships and mechanisms in the background, far off explosions. I really liked the look of this. There was some speculation that, this isn't necessarily a one-to-one reference of something that happened in the Clone Wars. But it is kind of speculated this takes place around the Battle of Ryloth, which is kind of portrayed in the Clone Wars around the end of Season 1. Specifically, Season 1, Episode 19, there's the episode Storm over Ryloth, which Ryloth is Hera's home planet. That's where the Twi'leks are from. They were being starved out by the Separatists. And even the quote at the beginning of that episode is, "It is a rough road that leads to the heights of greatness." And I feel like that's so much of what is part of this vision and part of what Ahsoka is kind of dealing with here. And that episode in particular saw Ahsoka taking command of a squadron for the first time. She was very overconfident, leads her squadron into a trap. Many of them die as a result, and an entire Republic Star Cruiser is also destroyed.
Wow.
She and Anakin,
That's right.
They barely escape with their lives. He gives her a pep talk about the weight of command. And later, as she recovers, Obi-Wan warns Anakin that he'll need her help going forward if he's going to get through this, which I think not only ties into this episode, but also Anakin's journey as a whole, and also probably where Ahsoka is coming through this. And to kind of get on to that point a little bit more, I'll talk a bit more of the action of this flashback. Ahsoka is struggling to understand the meaning of this vision, but she must keep up with Anakin as the battle rages around them. She soon finds herself in the aftermath as dead and injured clone troopers are taken off the field. She laments to Anakin that this is not how she envisioned her training, that she wants to have, more to pass on to her future Padawans than just how to fight. And Anakin tells her that Jedi are meant to lead and must adjust to the times, and that, the only alternative to fighting is dying. And as he turns and leads another charge of soldiers, we see a brief flash of the visage of Vader in the smoke, which is such a cool shot, such a cool moment. But I think it shows that, also in that moment, what I've seen people point out is that as Anakin's running forward at first, when you see Anakin, he's surrounded by these clone troopers. But when he flashes to Vader, he's completely alone.
Oh,
and he's just Vader.
Yeah.
And that shows in that moment when Obi-Wan even tells him that, of you'll need Ahsoka going forward. When he lost Ahsoka, that is when he did start to turn to the dark side.
Yeah.
Or not start to turn to the dark side, but when his turn was completed.
Yeah.
When he was alone. And I think that shows so much of, what this show and so much of what Filoni, I think, sees Star Wars as being about, as, your found family. And, you may not necessarily be related to these people that you join up with, but they can become your family through choice and through what you choose to do and through your experiences together. And I think that relates to very much what Sabine is going through after, the Ghost Crew became this family. And so many of them spun out into their own, grown families, whether it be true families, whether with Jason and Hera, or Zeb with his people, but Sabine has been left without her found family.
Yeah.
And for Anakin, it was much the same. Palpatine did such a masterful job of separating him from everybody that was around him and that supported him. Getting him away from Obi-Wan, getting him away from Ahsoka, and making sure that he was on his own, because when he was on his own, he was weaker and fell prey to his insecurities.
Yeah.
And so all that to say, yes, this is very much about, I think, where Anakin winds up and how how Ahsoka has just has internalized that turn and that information. And I don't know, I guess to kind of give you a chance to speak on this as well, Keith, what are your takeaways from this scene and Anakin's message of having to continue to fight? You either fight or you die. Is his message to be trusted? I mean, is his advice wise, or is it sort of tainted by his own experiences?
Yeah,
what do you think?
I think that's the really interesting predicament here, is because as the audience, it's you want, and I think it's, again, putting the audiences in Ahsoka's shoes. You want to trust Anakin, and you want to have this sense of, he knows, and to learn, and to, learn from his experiences. But at the same time, what is to come, and where this path that he's on leads to. And so it's hard to kind of, what is true and what is leading you down the wrong path. And I think it's interesting because, something we see in the prequels a lot is Anakin's excitement to fight and Obi-Wan's reluctance to fight. And I think that happens again with in the Clone Wars, where you see Ahsoka being like, this doesn't feel like the right way to go about things. And to have that kind of clash with her master, I think was part of it ended up being the breakup that ended up happening. I think, again, everything you said that, Filoni talks about and that sort of thing is true. He also mentioned actually about like how Star Wars is about like love and unconditional love, and that within the family that you find. And I think there is a certain amount of heartbreak that goes through this for Ahsoka, seeing how her master, just goes off and becomes something that she never even could have imagined in the worst way, and she blames herself to some extent.
Absolutely. Even when she tells Din about when she's refusing to train Grogu, and she talks about the dangers of the connections that and feeling personally connected to others, that the danger that presents to a Jedi, she mentions that she saw what happened and that he was the best of us.
Yeah.
She saw Anakin as the best of us, but or the best of the Jedi, and even he was able to fall. And I think that there's a lot to be said about that, and I think there's a lot to be. We touched on this last week, where Anakin, and he talks about it here too. He was forged as a Jedi in a time of war, and while he may not have been, the Clone Wars may not have started in earnest until he became a Jedi Knight. Episode 1, again, we talked about this last week. We meet Obi-Wan as he comes into negotiations.
Yeah,
that's how he sees the role of the Jedi in the galaxy. Anakin joins up with Qui-Gon, and within a few days is in the pilot seat of a Naboo star cruiser, blowing up ships, and yippee, yahoo, and this is pod racing, and it's all, and he's rewarded for it.
Yeah,
and that's, I think sometimes the lessons you learn are not necessarily true, but that they are the lessons that you learn, and I think that is what he learned from this, is that violence is to be somewhat celebrated and is a viable path. Yeah. And I think that is why he is so quick to go to it, is because it comes easy to him.
Yeah.
And that is how he sees it. And he even tells Ahsoka in the scene, Jedi used to be peacekeepers, or we were peacekeepers. That's not what we are now.
Yeah.
And so you need to adjust, and you need to become something else. And that's what I'm here to teach you, is how to be something else, because I need you to lead and I want you to survive.
Yeah.
And that's how he sees how to survive in this world, is, through fighting. And I think there's some truth in that. I think, obviously, Anakin takes it to an extreme. But I think if there's a way that Ahsoka can take it, with a bit of a grain of salt, where I think Ahsoka has fallen off and needs to learn how to fight, is that she has kind of, in a way, gotten a bit passive and walked away from so much and said, this is not my fight. I'm sick of fighting. I've given up in a lot of ways, where it's like, it's not necessarily that you need to fight physically or violently, but you need to care. You need to put yourself out there. You need to join and participate and be active and serve a role, fight for something, not just fight something.
I think for me, I will say it would definitely, I thought all the echoes back and the bigger picture, 20,000 feet, was really good. I think the message could have been a little bit more clear for the now and the present and the episode and the conflict that was going on with Ahsoka at the moment. To me, it felt like a little bit of a lesson out of left field.
Okay.
And I think in the big picture, makes a lot of sense for her. And I think maybe as the show goes on, we'll see a little bit more of that full circle moment. But the idea of fighting, I didn't see a moment so far in the story, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, where there was this reluctance to fight in Ahsoka's story that we've seen so far. To me, she's whipped out her lightsabers and fought every time that someone has come at her. She's gone right at the problem with Hera every time. There's been no kind of, I don't know. So to me, it was a little bit on the nose for something that I didn't really see the rhyme to it, as we were talking about with George. And maybe it's coming. Maybe it's coming. Maybe that's where it's going towards. But regardless, it was still really cool.
Yeah, it was. And if I were to disagree at all, I would just say like I do agree that she has certainly anytime that somebody else has pulled up on her with a lightsaber, she's more than happy to like meet them in battle and clash with them. But especially in this more live action series, since, you know, she has her own personal mission and she's doing her own personal thing, you know, in the search for Ezra and trying to find out where Thrawn is. But I think there's been less of a whole investment of her. Like, she's not whole assing this, you know, if I for lack of a better phrase, you know, I think, especially when you see her, she's hanging out with Luke, but she's not helping with the Jedi Temple. She tests, she kind of sees what Grogu's abilities are, but it's just like, nah, this is not for me. I mean, certainly she goes back and takes Sabine in, but there seems to even be maybe a little reluctance as far as even doing that when Hera originally approaches her with it. And I think there's a part of her that's kind of like, I'm on my own and I'm better off on my own, and doing my own thing. And if I were to say what I think she leaves this episode with is a bit more of a feeling of purpose and a feeling of, I know where to go next. And I know, you know, what my purpose is and how I feel I can help this fight going forward, rather than just kind of going through the motions, if that makes any sense. But moving on in the plot, on Cetos, the search continues. Carson warns that if they don't give up the search soon, they may run out of fuel. Hera pushes them on, and luckily Jason radios in that Chopper has a life reading, but they'll have to get very low to the water to see it. Back in Ahsoka's vision, she is reliving the siege of Mandalore, taking on Maul's loyalists, and we get even a quick glimpse of Commander Rex, which is pretty fun. We saw him a little bit earlier in the vision, but now he's got some lines. Anakin joins her again and says that, you know, you've become a true warrior. He's very impressed with how she's fighting. Clearly she's handling business against these Mandalorians, and says that she's part of a long legacy of great Jedi. She again complains that, you know, she wants to be more than just a tool of war and death. And Anakin says that she is, just like him. She counters that, you know, he was more destructive than anyone could have possibly imagined, and he tells her that she still doesn't understand, and when he turns this time, his eyes are the Sith yellow that we've seen him don before.
So cool.
And when his blade ignites this time, it is red. Keith, tell me about your thoughts on this moment.
I mean, I thought one of the things they did the best in the prequels was the physical, like, viewable change in Hayden Christensen and body language, the eyes, everything. And it was just to see that transformation over the course of like 5 minutes. Like, there's such a cool kind of just highlight reel in the best way. And you just get that sense of power. And I the third of the prequel movies is my favorite. And to get more of that kind of feeling was just really exciting for me. And terrifying for Ahsoka. And and I think it's the first time we've seen that she's seen him in this state, to my knowledge, right? I mean, it's like pretty much towards
no comment.
Towards and so to me it was very appropriate, and I thought one of the best parts of the flashback or World Between Worlds, I guess, of it all.
Yeah, I do agree that it's chilling to see him turn and have that. To have him turn and see that turn.
Yeah.
And yeah, just physically he's paler. His eyes obviously are a different color. But it's interesting just to see like, oh, this is what Vader could have been had he not failed against Kenobi. And how terrifying that would. I mean, he was bad enough as he was.
No, he's bad news.
Even this would have been even worse.
Yeah.
But what I thought was interesting about this was seeing that Anakin had, or at least who we're meeting. I'm not, to be honest, fully convinced this was Anakin, capital A Anakin.
Oh, interesting.
As much as this was the living force communicating with Ahsoka and trying to bring her back to her calling and maybe using Anakin as a vessel to teach that lesson. Because as we've seen, she fell into the World Between Worlds. Previously, when we see this in Rebels, it's more of like, there's a gateway that you go through to get there. And clearly here it was not exactly the same.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you have to walk through a doorway to get there. The World Between Worlds is separate from space and time. I think there's plenty of ways you could get there. And I think trying to put too fine a point on it kind of demystifies the Force.
Right.
And which kind of takes some of the fun out of it.
Yeah.
But I think what's what this made me think of was, again, going back to Clone Wars and the Mortis arc. Did you watch the Mortis arc when we covered Clone Wars earlier on Heard the Nerds? With the brother, the sister, and the father on the faraway planet?
Yes, I think I did. Yes.
So this really made me think about that and Anakin's larger role in Star Wars and his role within the Force, and even the idea of that conversation of who is the chosen one between Anakin and Luke. And again, I'm about to go on a tangent. Please feel free to interrupt if I just go into a fugue state and don't stop talking for a while. But Anakin, to me, in this moment, is kind of what Kara said earlier, not necessarily a being of light or dark, but light and dark. And in that Mortis arc, Anakin is approached by the father saying, like, my power is waning, my time is ending, and you are the next person that will be this avatar that can control light and dark. And he does, like, at one point, subduing both the sister and the brother, the representations of the light and the dark at once. And I think he is this, it's not that necessarily Anakin is the one that brought balance to the Force as much as he is the Force.
Yeah.
He is this living embodiment of the Force made flesh. Truly space Force Jesus, born of immaculate conception, walking amongst, the humans and aliens in this manifestation of what the Force truly is. And I do believe that it is Luke that is the chosen one, because he is the one that brought balance to the Force.
Right.
He is the one that brought balance to Anakin and Vader, because Anakin became this tool of, in my opinion, both the Jedi and the Sith.
Right.
He is, at first used by the Jedi to a certain degree through a strict adherence to the light side to whatever degree, and is unhappy then, and is then later on used as a tool of the dark side by Palpatine, and is unhappy then as well.
Right.
And it's not until he kind of comes in, until he finds his balance through Luke and, and everything that happens with that experience, that I think he does find his peace and his balance, and he can exist as both.
I think one of the greatest parts about the more you watch Star Wars is that the more you realize that the Jedi make mistakes.
Absolutely.
And the Sith are the only ones that deal in absolutes.
Yeah.
And the Jedi they're different. One of the main differences is their ability to admit mistakes.
Yes.
And to have faults and to improve. I think Obi-Wan Kenobi is kind of the perfect example of somebody who's made a lot of mistakes despite being this great and powerful Jedi that gets put on a pedestal and he kind of a fall from grace. And so I think, that I think that assessment is dead on for what you're saying as far as the Force goes. To me, in this kind of world between worlds, I kind of put the rules on it of like when Luke goes into that tree trunk in the Dagobah system.
Sure.
I was just like, it's like they're there, but they're not there. He's like, you can put whatever rules on it you want, but like that was kind of the state that I kind of pictured this all in. It's like, again, Dumbledore rules. Like it could be a dream, but like that doesn't mean it's not real. So I did have a question though, because like, all right, so we're basically at the point where like, are we at the point of the end of the fight now?
Okay. And so, I can jump into that and kind of get into that action to kind of segue into that. So they clash, and Anakin kicks Ahsoka through the smoke back into the world between worlds, or at least as we've seen it, into her adult form. He tells her that she lacks conviction, and they fight intensely. Ahsoka manages to grab Anakin's red blade, and we see her eyes turn for a second, and in the instant that she holds the blade to his throat. But she turns it off, casts it aside, declares that she chooses to live, and we see that, Anakin smiles and tells her that there's still hope for her. And before we move on completely, did you have something you wanted to talk about?
Well, I was just curious what you made of this moment. Because to me, this was like the moment. But I mean, to me, this is the temptation, right? This is Ahsoka's kind of dead-on temptation to turn to the dark side. I would have liked it to be a little bit more like, I don't want to say Vader-esque, but like there to be kind of like this moment where you see Ahsoka seeing what would happen if she killed Anakin, like, or she was able to stop Anakin, like, it would have stopped all these bad things from happening. It's a little bit like going back in time to kill Hitler kind of thing. It's like, but it's a temptation, right? You can't do that. It's just not a thing that is possible, but that's the lure of the dark side. It makes these things that seem impossible potentially possible, and you're just grasping at the potential as opposed to what's actually in front of you, which is murdering your friend. So I would have liked a little bit more of a meal out of that moment personally, but I liked it. I thought it was really great. I just wanted more, you know.
I agree, because if Star Wars has harped on anything, it's that the dark side is quicker and it is easier.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing in this moment, exactly as you said, that the easy thing to do, quote unquote, is to kill Anakin.
Right.
Is to just be like, well, I can't save him. I can't deal with this. Like, I'm killing him and then moving on because that's the easiest way to just handle this situation. Whereas the more difficult thing to do is to really grasp with what you've been through and what you've dealt with, and to move on and to live with all of that you have and still carry on and continue that fight.
Yeah.
And to continue fighting, to go to the MCU. What is grief if not love persevering? And that's kind of what
we're just hitting all the franchises.
All right.
Today.
We're just checking them off one by one. But I do think that's essentially what we're seeing here, is that the quick and easy thing is for her to kill off Anakin, kill off the idea of what he was. But it's harder to still hold that idea of that person, that complicated person in your mind, and still care for them.
Yeah, it's how you choose to live is the real question. It's not it's live or die, but there's no specification as to how you live. And Anakin chooses to live by fighting, and Ahsoka chooses not to, or not, you know, or at least chooses to keep fighting in her own way.
Her own way.
Yeah, which I think is just, again, classic Ahsoka. So.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, Anakin smiles, tells her there's still hope for her, and disappears as water starts to rise around Ahsoka, and soon she finds herself floating in the waters of Cetos.
Okay, I had a moment here, and I was dead wrong, where I thought that there, like when she was on the path in the big wide shot, I'm like, there's going to be a line across, or like the pathway is going to send her right towards where she's supposed to go. It didn't happen. But
the waters rose, and she found herself floating on Cetos, somewhere in the middle of it. But luckily, she is rescued by Hera and her team of X-Wing pilots.
It's got to be tough to dive in those suits, though. I was feeling it for that time.
Gosh.
Like, they're just big balloons, basically. I mean, they're so baggy.
Oh, my God. Yeah, they must have been strong swimmers.
Yeah, I was like, all right.
Yeah.
Good for them. Oh, also, we forgot to shout him out last week, but I did notice this. He was in the credits. He was in it again. One of the X-Wing pilots is Brendan Wayne. And if you don't know that name, Brendan Wayne is the stunt double and person who is actually in the Mandalorian suit 95% of the time that you see on screen. They only started crediting him, I think, season 2, but he's got this amazing. He is really the embodiment of the Mandalorian. And Pedro is obviously the voice, but he's the grandson of John Wayne, actually, funny enough, and that's where they
Hollywood royalty
get that amazing kind of Texas Ranger walk when Mando's walking.
Oh, he's got it. Yeah, he's got the saunter down.
Brendan's in one of the cockpits. Great guy, really talented stunt double, and just wanted to give him a shout out as well.
Well deserved.
Yeah.
So Ahsoka wakes up the next day. Hu Yang tells her they've yet to find Sabine and hoped that she could tell them what happened. She emerges from her ship dressed all in white. More on that in a little bit. And Hera asks her if there's a way that they can find where Sabine went. Ahsoka takes her map and is able to sense the events that transpired before its destruction, learning of Sabine's fate and betrayal, really. Hera is summoned to a call from Mon Mothma as Ahsoka is left to ponder how they'll find Sabine, and her eyes drift towards the sky to a pot of Pergil.
Yeah.
So before we move on, I do want to touch a little bit on what I mentioned, that we see Ahsoka kind of coming out from the ship dressed in white. Filoni has commented that he sees Ahsoka, especially in her later years and in the context of Rebels, as sort of a Gandalf figure.
Totally. Oh, I love that. I didn't know that, but that makes sense.
Yeah. So he throughout, especially Rebels, you see her dressed in gray and having her pop in and out of the story and offering sage advice and guiding them on their missions. And sort of at the end of definitely at the end of Rebels, originally when she approached Sabine, she's all dressed in white. And we see here again that, as she is reborn from her vision from the Force, she is renewed with purpose and eager to aid in the fight to save the galaxy, much as Gandalf was in Lord of the Rings. There's another franchise we are checking off.
And so you're equating Ahsoka to basically now she's back as Gandalf the White.
She is, she is Ahsoka the White. She is now reborn, emerging from her brush with death, having conversed with the Force, and now rejoining the fight of the living, repurposed with new vigor. I am here to continue my fight against the darkness.
Yeah, I mean, and she literally talks to the flying things in the sky that can take them to other places. I mean, that's
the eagles are coming.
Like pretty much one-to-one. But the other thing this was another moment to me of like Filoni doing Filoni things where Ahsoka's just standing there, and it's like we hear everything. She's doing like the Batman thing. Check. Where, you know, kind of detective. Like I was expecting to see like the Force, like, you know, you remember in the video game, there's like you can kind of re-see those scenes that happen. Like I was expecting some of that, and we just got a 360 and hearing the voices, and it's like, again, it's that thing where we've seen what just happened, we know what's happened, and it's like we got to go through it again. Like I love seeing Ahsoka's reaction to it, but we can do that in one moment as opposed to like 1 40-second, you know, clip there, and we kind of want to move along here. But it's a pacing thing. It's just a preference. For me, I was just like, this is the movie shot. We're in the TV show shot. You know, where you got to go a little bit quicker. And I think getting through those things to kind of find out what happens next. I'm just excited to go see Thrawn and like that whole shebang. So I mean, it's just kind of like my preference. I get why he does it, and I can appreciate it as a filmmaker, but
in this instance, I totally agree. It didn't bother me as much earlier in the episode. I didn't necessarily need all of that pausing with Hera, maybe necessarily, but here specifically, my issue was this was not new information to us as an audience.
There was no new information being.
What I can appreciate, at least with what they were doing earlier with Hera, is it felt like this character is learning something about her son.
Yeah.
Which maybe is obvious to the rest of us.
Yeah.
Being like, well, yeah, you knew Kanan was a Jedi. Like, you got a pretty good chance. Your son literally looked up at you like a half hour ago going, I got a bad feeling about this. But I, at least with that, I can kind of give it some leeway. Here it was like, you are literally just recapping something I saw.
I mean, this happened in episode 2 as well, and it was just, you know, but anyway.
Yeah, Sabine even just look in the first couple episodes, looking at the map and just being like, for a good 30 seconds, and then cutting away with no additional information or dialogue. Yes, it was a little bit more of that.
It's fine. It's again, nitpicky small things.
For sure. On the Ghost, Hera is getting the bad news from Mon that without Elsbeth in custody or evidence of Thrawn's return, she is likely to lose her command after this stun.
This is very much like Commissioner Gordon crap right here. It's just, I was just like, again, another Batman reference, but it's just like, it's very much, you know, but you have any evidence? No, then you're coming back in, you know, and it's
taking you into the station.
Yeah, you're gonna lose your rank, Captain.
Right. Yeah. So unfortunately, Hera helped Batman, and now, yes, they are. Her hens are coming to roost. New Republic ships are on their way, and they are prepared to take them all into custody for testimony back on Coruscant.
That was a big fleet that rolled in, by the way.
That was 2-3 massive ships.
Those things are stocked to the brim with, like, that's a lot of resources to go after a general who already made contact. Like, I get if oh my God, there's bad guys here, like, we got to send the fleet, great, but they wouldn't even send anybody to this place at first, and then the general goes off on a mission which she told everyone about, they know why she's there. What else she, like, why are we not using these resources better? I don't know. It's just,
listen, I'm not going to sit here and defend the New Republic. I've got some issues with how they do things.
Don't we all?
As we've seen across, you know, Mando and some other properties. I think that there's a lot that they haven't learned from their predecessors, and, you know, obviously that leads to where the sequel trilogy goes and why they failed. But yeah, just not a great allocation of resources here. You know,
they almost hit the whales too. I mean, it was like come on,
they did. And I wonder if this is just like, I don't know if they're just chopping this up to like, hey, you're going in there and there's a Jedi and, you know, Harrison Dula, who's an ace pilot. You know, you gotta, maybe it's a show of force. I don't know. It's just, you're right. It was a bit much.
It's neither here nor there. So.
Okay, I'm not going to defend him. But as she hangs up the call, Ahsoka says that, you know, hey, I've got other plans of I'm not going back to Coruscant. Nah. Y'all can do what you're going to do. I got somewhere else to be, and points up towards the Purrgil. And as the New Republic ships come in to scoop up their quarry, Carson, Teva, and Hera run interference to buy Ahsoka time to commune with those Purrgil. She finds the biggest in the pod, reaches out through the Force, states her purpose. The Purrgil seems to agree enough, allows Hu Yang and Ahsoka to fly their ship inside its mouth. And Hu Yang points out, hey, there's no guarantee that this Purrgil is going to take us exactly where we want to go, and Ahsoka says, yeah, I know. I'm just here along for the ride to see where it goes. And with that, the pod flies up through the atmosphere, and the New Republic ships must take evasive action as Purrgil fly past and shoot through hyperspace to their next destination.
It was really cool.
It was very
really
cool
watching the whales just boot out of there.
And I'm glad we're seeing, you know, Ahsoka kind of coming back into herself and finding her joy a bit more.
She definitely seemed lighter, which I think was, a good thing.
And I think that's a lot of what she kind of took away from that vision, is that she felt so guilty about who she was and her legacy and what, her master had passed on to her. And if she was tainted goods, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think that, through her temptation and her refusal of that temptation, I think it confirmed for her that she's not.
Yeah.
And that there's so much more good that she can do and so much more that she has to offer and to the galaxy and to her friends.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I will say that I think I was missing out of that interaction with Anakin, or who we think might have been Anakin, is I think there was a real opportunity to talk about teachers and teaching. With, I think, we set up this struggle with Sabine and Ahsoka and their training issues, and Anakin and Ahsoka had training issues, and Obi-Wan and Anakin had issues in their training, and lots of fights. Like, they've learned a lot about what it means to be a teacher and a Padawan. And I think there was a real opportunity to have some sort of nugget of gold about that in there, because essentially Sabine just betrayed her.
Yeah,
and she just so for her. That there's a lot of complicated feelings in there, and I feel like there's a direct link for how she feels Anakin must have felt when she left, or vice versa. Like, there's a lot of parallels there, and I just want a little bit more of that as well.
For sure, because I think where you can put that parallel is that Ahsoka walked away from Anakin and he fell to the dark side, and Ahsoka also walked away from Sabine and clearly left her in a rut.
Yeah.
And it left her in a place where she was, maybe she's not exactly like the Force user that everybody else in that line of masters and apprentices has been, but she has fallen to her own version of the dark side in her own way.
Yeah.
And fallen to that temptation.
Yeah.
And I think, obviously Ahsoka came back, but I think it's a bit of too little too late at that point. Sabine had already felt abandoned. She felt like she didn't have anybody else, to the point where even after Ahsoka comes back, she still feels like the only person she might have left is Ezra.
Yeah.
This person that, obviously if you're just watching this show, you've never seen, but somebody that she hasn't had a connection with in years.
Yeah.
As we know Zeb is still around. We know Hera's still around.
Yep.
We know Ahsoka's still around, and yet Sabine feels no connection with them, to the point that she's just like, full emo mode in her little apartment on Lothal. Yeah, and is just chomping at the bit to try to go find Ezra. Literally just watching his message over and over again before she even knows she has this opportunity to go rescue him.
Not healthy. It's just not
not
healthy.
in
It's
a good
just not
headspace.
So as far as predictions go, I there was one quick moment where Ahsoka kind of nods or winks at Jason for his abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there's any, what do you think is going to happen with Jason? Do you think he's going to become, because he was talking about really being excited to train or see some cool stuff like inside the Jedi ship, and do we think that's going to go anywhere? Because he clearly has something going on. And,
Absolutely. The way they have been so heavy-handed with it, especially this last episode about his abilities with the Force and his want to be a Jedi.
Yeah.
I think they'd have to bend over backwards to make it make sense that wouldn't happen at this point.
Right.
One way or another. What makes me kind of laugh and smile is just like, well, what does that mean for Jason's ultimate fate, considering where we know where things go?
I know.
Even the last episode, I joked around like, Jason killed by Kylo Ren confirmed. You have to wonder what does that mean, and where any of these characters go, because Ahsoka, we know at that point, even as Rey is communing with the other Jedi at the end of Rise of Skywalker, Ahsoka is one of the voices she hears.
Yeah.
Ahsoka is not around.
Yeah.
What does that mean for where she is after all of this happens? A big shrug. I don't know.
Big shrug.
But I think it would be interesting for Jason to continue the legacy and his father's legacy as a Jedi. I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity if he doesn't.
Yep.
But I think it's going to be interesting to see exactly how that takes shape.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a breadcrumb trail that they've left for us. Whether I don't know where it's going to go, but it's not nothing. They definitely went for it.
I don't know if this is an Easter egg or if this is an overlap or something, but you have to wonder, talking about connections through the Force. There is a moment in season 3 of Mando where something I had pointed out, where Din and Grogu are going through hyperspace, and Grogu notices that there are the shadows of these creatures alongside them in hyperspace, and they are Purrgil, and he kind of reaches out. Is this an overlap?
Are they going one way and they going the
yeah,
other?
they're kind of like, passing each other. Like, what's that meme from like Umbrella Academy? They're, passing each other and scoping each other out in those cars.
The problem is you don't even have an opportunity for it to actually happen because there's no windows inside that whale.
No.
So there's no like, hi,
Right.
But I guess that could be a potential timeline,
that could
line up.
Be a crossover point of just like, okay, that's where how all this is lining up chronologically.
Yeah.
Which would be interesting because this is all happening sort of together in the same Filoni Mando verse thing that they're cultivating.
Right. So do you think we're going to see Thrawn in the next episode? Because Cam's not here. Well, I can kind of hear him in my head for some reason, weird Force stuff. But I know he's excited to see Thrawn, or at least somebody of that nature on the other side of this coin. Do you think it's gonna be next episode, or do you think we're gonna get a little bit of time in the whale tummy first?
Right, and that's part of what what made me laugh about Ahsoka being like, "Well, I don't know where this is gonna go." It's like you don't exactly have like all the time in the world. You kind of do. There is a bit of a time ticking clock here on this to get where you're going. I do think we see Thrawn next episode. Okay. I think they've done a great job of making us not watch that clock as closely these last few episodes. I think, we were talking about it certainly the first couple episodes of just like, when do you think we'll see Thrawn? When do you think we'll see Ezra? And I know, like you mentioned, Cam was kind of being like, well, if they don't get to it by a certain point, I'm going to be a little like, what are we doing here? These last 2 episodes, that has not been my opinion at all.
Yeah. I mean, Cam was saying last week that is like because we saw Anakin and there was that kind of bump of the story. I think it kind of really satiated any sort of like, where are the big bad guys, kind of thing. I am still of the opinion that he's going to be the mic drop at the end of the show. I don't see them introducing that character and then in the next, because we have 3 left.
Three left.
We have 3 left. So that's a quick arc for us to get there, learn about him. And I mean, I feel like we may get a little bit of an Ezra mic drop at the end, or it might be a Thrawn mic drop. Like we think that Ezra's gone, and then at the end, last episode, we see some glimmer of him. They defeat Thrawn, but defeating Thrawn in 3 episodes just seems like so fast. I don't know. It does. I mean, they could drop an 1.5 hour episode on the last one. We have no idea. It's truly like it's anybody's game at this point.